anytime you're ready.
Yeah, and feel free to post it wherever too. That's cool.
Thank you. I really appreciate it.
All right, stand by. Here we go. I need to record on my end. Need to record on here. All right. Ari, welcome to Forbidden Knowledge News. How you doing?
Doing well. How you doing?
I'm doing great. I've really been looking forward to this. Like I was telling you, you've been doing some amazing research. And alternative history is, to start with, one of my favorite topics. And with everything I've learned to be false about what our current history books and academia has taught us, I really think that almost anything could be possible when it comes to the depth of deception that we've been indoctrinated with about our history. I'm looking forward to hearing about your research and what you've got into. But first, tell us, how did you get into this? What led you down this path?
Sure, you bet. Essentially, 2014-ish, on Facebook, there was a good ton of release of all kinds of conspiracy things, everything from flat Earth to hollow Earth to simulate Earth, everything in between. And boy, did it spark my imagination. I basically fell hard for a lot of them. Nibiru theory, it's coming, and all that. Flat Earth, could it be possible? And just every one of these, it really pinged my interest. It also really got my interest how people were affected by these topics who did not care about them. They basically they would say, scoff at the topic, change topic, and I realized after a while that these topics are extremely powerful because they are constantly provoking the unexplained in our lives. So much stuff that we just haven't explained, or at least enough for ourselves, had to sort of take the word of people who write books, make movies, politicians, and so forth. And then suddenly someone can just point out something wrong with the system, a contradiction, and then you're stuck with a choice, sort of like Matrix style, red or blue, yes or no. You don't have anything between. You have to go along with one crew or the other. So that's what really got my interest, was that a lot of these topics relate to social engineering, maybe purposefully, maybe spontaneously, but overall, the effect that these topics have on the masses, and how they react when, say, in 2012, we started seeing people in the street corners holding signs saying this is the end of the world, right? Nobody knew what to make of that stuff back then, and now it's sort of over. That hasn't been explained yet, and I think the answers are still there to be explained.
Yeah, man, for sure. I mean, I remember whenever I first started learning about all the things I've been lied about, I went down some crazy rabbit holes too. But it's like you got to go through it to learn, and decipher for yourself what you think is real. And I use my gut feeling for a lot of it, and I think that's the only way you're gonna get through it, is using your intuition and gut feeling. Because a lot of this stuff is not, you can't confirm it, you can't find any kind of proof other than what's been put out through word of mouth. There's no kind of paper trail on anything. So yeah, it's a hard thing to decipher through. But I want to get into the theory that our civilization, what we know as our modern history, may not even be close to as old as we're told,
Right.
and it's highly manipulated. Where should we start with this? And how old do you think our modern day history goes back?
Well, to me, in my mind, the last 1,000 years of history represent modern history, where humans are in charge, they're doing everything. And everything before 1,000 years ago essentially was cataclysmic origin story sort of history. And in that timeline, the all the way back to the origin, the calendar keeps changing in length. It goes from really short 225 days to the 365 days we know today. So what I'm referencing here is Saturnian cosmology. This is a type of cosmology similar to what NASA teaches us, or what the Bible represents, that the cosmology created by God, essentially. This is an alternate. It's one that suggests that our solar system was created in a short cataclysmic timeline, short compared to um, anthropology's accepted timeline of billions of years, 4.5 billion year Earth, 13.8 billion year um, sun and universe. But but for Saturnian cosmology, everything happens in a very short timeline. That's not my theory. You can look it up. Essentially, the creation of Earth begins with the planet Saturn, and Saturn sort of spawns all of the planets we know. In big cataclysm of planets colliding into each other, rotating around each other, visible on Earth, was written down as mythology by every civilization on Earth. We all saw it. We all in person. It wasn't something that was passed down in books. It was something they all actually saw and then drew on the caves, drew on manuscripts, created idols, helmets. You got it, with icons representing what they saw. And in this timeline, essentially, solar systems do not stay static for millions of years. They reach a like a maximum point where they can sustain life. The life within the solar system sort of gradually decays, as all life does. Planets move towards the outside of the solar system, and then suddenly the solar system's ripe for a new birth of planets. That's Saturnian cosmology. As you can see, it's totally different from what NASA says, where planets have to accrete and collect due to gravity over millions or billions of years, and then long after that, life spawns very, very slowly. That's the NASA paradigm. So, like I said, Saturnian very short. The NASA one very long, but the Bible one is the shortest one of all, because the Bible says within 6 days, right? Even though the first day there was no sun, so you can't tell how long that day was. But the Bible represents the shortest timeline of all. And in many religions today, you find calendars that attempt to maintain the timeline since the origin. I was raised Jewish, so I saw the Jewish calendar my whole life, right there next to the Gregorian one that everyone else uses. And the year was always in the 5,600 or something. I can't remember right now, but it's always the year 5,000 something. And this is since God created the Earth. So the religious people seem to believe that the Earth's timeline is around 5,000 years. And the only reason that I would say it's any shorter than that is because I have reason to believe that the calendar year back then was shorter than 360 days. It was as short as 225 days, and that means that the years were shorter, the timeline was shorter, and we're dealing with maybe even less than 4,000 years as we know it today.
Now, do you think that there was civilization possibly before that period that may have been completely wiped out due to massive cataclysms, or is that when you believe life itself on our planet began?
I definitely believe that life began with the Golden Age when Earth entered the collinear configuration of planets and rotated around our sun. This Golden Age spawned life. That's the nature of the Golden Age. High amplitude energy at very safe levels, low frequency. And this energy not just spawns life, but keeps it alive. Apparently, if you read a lot of these religious texts, the Hindu text of the Brahma or the Christian Bible, you'll see that life and death sort of didn't exist yet, that you can step in between those states. You can come back from death easily, that kind of stuff. And that represents a high amplitude energy environment, idyllic and impossible for us to imagine today. In that environment, not only was animals and plants just sort of created out of nowhere, but they weren't. That's the thing. What animals and plants and so forth life need to evolve into what they are today is not DNA, it's not the proper conditions. It's literally the memory of that etherical life form somewhere else. And we know that life exists other places in this galaxy, universe, galaxy, whatever you want to call it. Life on other solar systems could come here etherically, energetically, and in this golden age spawn in all shapes and forms. This is partially my theory, but if you look into etheric, if you believe in the ether in general, if you understand that it's the basis of life, it's the basis of consciousness, afterlife, it's where life goes when we die, it's where it comes from when we come back, that it's actually just the next step forward for that life to take physical form in a golden age. So my theory is, yes, life spawned spontaneously on its own, knowing what it used to be, memories from other planets.
And this was like what you said, about 5,000 to 6,000 years ago?
Yeah, not that long ago.
Now, what would you say to those, people that are working in these fields of ancient history,
Right.
alternative history, actually, that have evidence of, 20,000-year-old civilization, even further, million-year-old human skeletons that look like Homo sapiens sapien.
Right.
What do you think about that?
Well, here's the part that's advantageous to my side of this, the short timeline argument. It's that
Mhm.
how could you possibly prove with any instrument a more than 10,000 year timeline? You would have to think about it. You have to have certain things. You have to have generations that kept the books in order for that long and um, not been wiped out, in the last 100, 200 years of when indigenous populations were wiped out. So do we have anything like that? I don't believe so. Even in Bach Saga, you see at the end, there's an endpoint to the lineage that's been written down. It gets to a point, and after that, they say, oh, Younger Dryas, and that we know the Younger Dryas lasted 30,000 years. So I will always come in and say, how do you know that part, the 30,000 part, or the millions part? How do you know that part? And there's very few answers for that. The answer is carbon dating, and carbon dating, of course, is a big faith, big deal. You have to trust that the establishment got it right and they haven't exaggerated the timelines by thousands or millions. Because if they did, and it's back on purpose, then anything carbon dating today is based on those incorrect scales. So carbon dating alone cannot be enough. We need something a little bit better than that. I don't think there is anything better than that.
That's interesting. Now, what would be the advantage of, a mass lie like this about the age of humanity?
Um, since I look at almost all of this from a social engineering point of view, um, I tried to determine what power lies in each lie. Why would a lie be told at all? It doesn't. It's not good strategy. Lies are almost always caught and exposed, and then the motives are exposed, and then it's over. So you're talking about lies that are so powerful that they're never exposed, or maybe that exposing them causes more, damage to the person than to the lie itself. The theory of this technique is called revelation of method. This technique, revelation of method, is essentially um, one of the most powerful social engineering techniques. You put the lie out there in public view where everyone can see it. You allow the people who actually care about it to early resist, early identify themselves. You take them out. You change the message. You conform it to something that everyone will accept, and then you have a winning scenario every time. So revelation of method puts the lie on us, the onus on us, and then we have to say, oh, that politician's lying, that movie's lying, or the movie says science fiction, and I know it's not science fiction. Whatever claim you want to make will expose more, shed more light on you than it will ever do, convince people that there could be a lie out there. So this is the most powerful technique, and I believe that if you use this strategy as a primer, you can actually find the power behind each of these lies, every last one of them, from television to the Bible to anthropology, history, all of it.
Now, based on your research, who's behind this? Who are the powers in control? And is it the same ones that are in control and pulling strings today? And when did they come into control? Can you give us a little history about that?
You bet. I started these theories from a totally different angle. A life on Mars. That was where I was at about 2 years ago. I looked into 19th century literature, and it turns out that a lot of people on Earth believe that there are humans living on Mars in the 19th century, occasionally visiting, generally friendly, sometimes not, and that in the 20th century, all of a sudden, all of that entered a category called science fiction. Was brand new, starting with the book War of the Worlds that came out in the year 1900. And suddenly, after that book, nobody believed that humans lived on Mars or anything. They think that aliens were real because aliens were depicted in such a ridiculous way, giant octopuses walking around. So I looked into that as a revelation of method tactic. If you actually are a human on Mars, wouldn't you do this to convince everyone that you're not there? Wouldn't you go the next step? Wouldn't you say, oh, we don't even have an atmosphere over here. We don't have anything livable. In the 80s, we saw that movie, Total Recall. Arnold Schwarzenegger, his head almost explodes, right? Because there's no atmosphere. They really scared us with these science fiction movies in order to get us to believe certain things, or rather scare us away from certain concepts, like maybe humans do live on Mars. So to answer your question, who's in charge? Well, I wouldn't necessarily say that they have an advantage in ruling another planet. It's more like they have to do this. They have no choice. That's a good starting point to try to determine why someone on a planet would do something like this, why they would act like a deep state here on Earth, why would they try to utterly control us and rule us. And the answer is simple. They don't have good resources up there. You got seasonal waters, according to literature, seasonal oceans, and the heavy reliance on technology and centralized populations and authority. And in this environment, you basically have people who are willing to go along with crazy plans in order to get resources from Earth and continuous resources, everything from food to women. There's population problems, overpopulation problems, but also problems with the ability to give birth in Mars, if you're to believe the literature. So they want everything from us, and they had two choices this whole time: to basically share technology or use technology to control, suppress technology. So what technology am I talking about? Back to Saturnian cosmology, Mars plays a shared origin story here with Earth. It's not a distant planet or another solar system. It's right there in the collinear configuration at our North Pole. If you look up the North Pole in the Golden Age, you'll see Mars, and you can travel to it, various means, and you can stand on top of it at the highest region that a human can stand in the collinear configuration, facing Saturn, facing Jupiter behind Saturn, and the sun behind Jupiter. Above this, no humans can stand. So this highest location, Mars, used to be the best location of all. It was Atlantis. It was the place of the best technology, of experimentation. They created history, they created memory, because they could store memory in crystals. That will be invented at some point in the future. It'll be called quantum computing. And crystals have the ability to store unlimited data. It's going to be very cool. So they figured all that stuff out in the Atlantis times. And they had a choice to release this stuff when Atlantis fell, when the collinear configuration fell, also known as the Tower of Babel, or the Sword in the Stone, or the Holy Grail disappearing. All these myths appeared from this one moment. When this Golden Age ended and the Dark Ages began, the Atlanteans did not share their technology. There's no reference of that. There's reference of people praying to altars, invisible gods, creating pyramids, a giant slave empire known as the Egyptian Empire, Babylonian, Sumerian, and a couple others. There actually it was one giant world empire of pyramids built all the way around the equator of the world. You'll find them all over the earth, not just in Egypt. Go to Iraq, you'll find way bigger pyramids than the ones in Egypt. So there's a ton of them. And this slave empire is proof to me that whoever built these pyramids did not do so for good, for everyone's good. They did it to control people. You go to the pyramids for everything you need. You see people, visions, you see entities forming them. You touch the altars and you hear and see visions from other places. These pyramids were used to essentially fake deities here on Earth for a long time. Baal and all those other deities that we had names for, people literally worship them because they see them physically manifesting in these pyramids. I won't get into the details of that. It's all on my website and go into it. Later, the nonlinear configuration falls apart. The pyramids no longer function, and people build cathedrals. The cathedrals have the word cathode in them, right? They are a cathode in nature. They receive energy. They protect locations from lightning scarring, which occurred in the past. And you can receive visions. You can communicate through cathedrals. It's kind of a big secret. These cathedrals, more or less, was Mars talking to us, ordering us around for 1,000 years. They did it. They were, in my opinion, they're involved in every single affair. They were the ones who ordered Andronicus Christ, otherwise known as Jesus, to be crucified in Istanbul. They're the ones who went over to the Rus Horde Empire side and convinced them to do a crusade in revenge for Jesus. And then they're the ones that went to the many hundred years later and caused the Jesuits to spread all over the world in a counter crusade against what the Rus Horde Empire had created. So in my opinion, and I'm just skipping all over the place, but in my opinion, yes, they've been influencing us for 1,000 years. It wasn't only until the last 200 years were they able to have direct influence. They actually started showing up in their technology, which is a couple hundred years ahead of us, and literally causing war on Earth. No longer do they want us to know about them. Now they want us to fight each other, and that's what the Civil War was, and World War One, World War Two. All of it was started by a foreign influence. It was not started by us.
So they started to kind of integrate this their own false version of history during that time, during maybe Civil War period or before.
I'm convinced it was a Jesuits expansion. That's when they started to create an entirely false history, false
Mhm.
locations. They moved Jerusalem to Palestine. They said the Rus Horde Empire wasn't there anymore. They said America, they said America was unknown. In all the maps, European, French, German maps, you'll see America's unknown the more north and west you go. This is because that area had not been conquered yet. So the Jesuits were mapping out all the locations that they had gone to and conquered. They went to Egypt. They built the Sphinx. I believe they built the Sphinx. They went to Sri Lanka. They found the Hindu religion that converted to Buddhism. And then they later on they lied and they said they found Buddhism. These Jesuits spread the monotheism version of every religion we know today all over the world. Into starting 16th century in just 200 years. They got everywhere, and and since then, we've all been sort of living a false timeline based on the Gregorian calendar, which puts Rome in Italy, when Rome actually is the memory of the Rus Horde Empire in Siberia. They moved Rome to Italy and they lied about it and said these guys conquered everyone around them with slave, empires, enslaved all the barbarians and the hordes and so forth. Nothing like this ever happened. I always had a problem with Roman history, and I'm not the only one to tell you that the entire Roman Empire history is complete sham. It not only was not in Italy, it was in Siberia, and it was the best empire this Earth has ever seen. It was inspired by the best qualities we've ever had. It's created the Olympics, for example, which unified the world in sports. These things are still around. It had the symbol of the eagle, which we see, two-headed eagle in many of the old flags. After Rus Horde Empire fell apart, we see one-headed eagle in England and here in America, pretending to be that old empire. England, the memory that they have of kings and symbols and all that, all of it was stolen from Siberia. My people from Middle East, the Jewish people. My dad's from Morocco, so as technically I'm Sephardi, and my mom has roots in Italy with the Jewish community. Our community, unfortunately, we stole a lot of history from Africa. We took the entire Exodus story from those Africans who actually experienced it on their continent and tied it up into our history and then spread it back. So yes, the Jesuit expansion triggered a great deal of resetting of history and knowledge in
Man,
general.
that's fascinating. Now, you mentioned that their technology was a few hundred years ahead of ours,
Right.
and you also put in the notes that they may have used it to change the course of history in the War of 1812. Could you talk a
Yes.
little bit about that?
Yes. And this again, just my theory. If the Jesuit expansion really was their influence, if they were the ones behind it, then it appears that the French Revolution ruined everything. And at the end of the 10-year French Revolution, Napoleon really ruined everything. So let me get into that. French Revolution was the French tried to work with the religious priest aristocracy, the Council of Elders, they called themselves, and said, hey, you guys run our government and we hate how you do things. You're so corrupt. So we want more representation. And they said no. So French Revolution throws them out of power and says, hey, guys, now we, by force, we took over parliament. So we want you guys to do a better job. They say, yes, we agree to anything the peasants want. They get back in power and they do all of the bad stuff times two. I'm just paraphrasing the revolution here. About halfway through, the aristocracy once again betrays the French in this massive way and brings a bunch of foreigners into their country. They say, oh, you guys want to vote? We're going to make all these foreigners have a vote too. And, we'll win by numbers. It's crazy. So again, the French throw out the aristocracy. They lynch a bunch of them. They guillotine a bunch of them. Shows you to what extent they had been upset by their rulers. But at the end of that, after they deposed their own king and his wife, they literally were faced with a power vacuum. In France, they had no one to rule this center of the planet to be frank. The French Empire at the time, sitting on the Jesuit expansion of the planet, they were in charge of Spain and all the boats and everything. That was the center of the capital of the world, and nobody was in charge. So when Napoleon finally declared himself emperor, it was not because he's an egoist. It was because the Tsar of Russia had done the same 3 years prior, and somebody was going to fill that vacuum. But for some reason, it looks like Napoleon had lost a devastating war in Siberia. That's how he went down. In 1812, he tries to invade Russia and Siberia, and his 420,000 man army dies in the Kremlin, right, leading up to the Kremlin, and then on the march back. So this history, when I read it recently, I mean, yeah, we heard it in history class, but when I read it recently, it really stuck out that Napoleon lost a devastating war in an inexplicable way. Then I found a bunch of details about Napoleon's army that I could not believe. This is stuff that is really hard to swallow. These are pictures, paintings mostly, of Napoleon's armies in airships, giant airship with, they're flying in the sky, carrying what they say is up to 10,000 soldiers each. This appears to be because the French are very small, and we're very small. They're what we know as midget size today. And Napoleon was short, despite what they try to tell us now. But anyway, they had airships, they had advanced technology, they had sound cannons. You see all these cannons all over the world and all these monuments. They don't work with gunpowder. They don't work with cannons. You can see those YouTube videos online. They do not work. Put a cannon in them and turn them on. Most of these cannons will just crack in half. Conversely, if you look up Army sound cannon on YouTube, you will find easily U.S. Army demonstrating what they've invented. Sound cannon fires, a slow donut of air moves towards the wall. Eventually it hits it, the entire wall comes apart. This technology does exist. And it appears that there's a lot of evidence that Napoleon had these sound cannons and they used them from the air to take out castles. There's no way these guys could have possibly lost against a much more demoralized and defeated Rus horde empire, which I'm not getting into the Russian history, but their entire empire fell apart in 1775. And since then, nobody was ruling them. So Napoleon should have had an easy time getting through there. Something happened and he lost. And then I stumbled upon a different theory, unrelated to Napoleon, on the same timeline. This is called the mud flood theory. Have you heard of mud flood?
I have. Yes, this is interesting.
Right. This is one that's just the biggest one of all, right? It's kind of mind-blowing that there's so much evidence of a mud flood left behind that we can look at today. And that the timeline for the mud flood, a lot of the researchers are agreeing, occurred in the early 19th century, around the year 1816 and ending around 1860. During this time period, during the 19th century in general, you can look up a series of devastating natural disasters that occurred throughout the planet. Everything from Tunguska event to the Dust Bowl that we allegedly caused. All these events that kind of left devastation behind. And the mud flood theory seems to be the only one that actually explains all of these events without getting into extreme explanations. For example, Tunguska event, Siberia, and I think it's 1912. The sky opens up and a huge fireball column hits the earth, and everyone feels like they're burning. Apparently, no one dies for some reason, but entire forests get wiped out. You can see the pictures online. This event should be significant in our history, but we don't get taught about this event in school. It's actually should be the most significant one because it's more powerful than a nuclear explosion. It's more powerful than a meteor strike. We don't know what it is, and it probably could happen again. So the fact that they're not worrying about the Tunguska event ever happening again, or even bothering to tell us that we need to still solve it, tells me that it's because they know it's not going to happen again. They know that it's just a redaction of a different, much larger event that is completely covered up. So if it's true, if there was a mud flood, if they did cover it up, this represents the biggest reset of human civilization on Earth ever. Nothing like it ever happened before or can possibly happen again. And I could answer that question.
Well, yeah, I mean, was this something that was intentionally caused as well as the Tunguska event?
Oh, I can't imagine that this was any kind of accident. The timing of this, the fact that technology continued to be suppressed afterwards, the fact that we live in a metered world now where you got to pay bills for electricity, all of these things line up perfectly with a purposeful reset of civilization, one that has strategy for rebuilding life on Earth. And there's evidence of this happening in the 19th century. We see trains, all of a sudden trains all over the planet, and these trains carried cargo. And without the cargo and without the tracks, these new civilizations out in the Wild West and so forth, and in China, would not be able to live out in those desert regions. They barely have water. So right away we can say those train tracks were not spontaneous industrial revolution human activity. Those train tracks represent a purposeful reset of human civilization, a reorganization of life. Anywhere that the trains lead, you have a loyal cargo cult. What's a cargo cult? It's a bunch of humans dependent on cargo. If you take the cargo away, they will organize and they'll throw out the tractors and they'll say, "I'm so sorry we ever didn't believe in you. Please continue the cargo." The cargo will return and the cargo cult continues. If you watch that play Oklahoma, they act like a cargo cult, right? They kick one of theirs out of their society and they have a song about the train arriving. These cargo cults are not spontaneous human behavior. These are evidence of reorganized human life. You can also look at another topic that's parallel to this, the orphan trains. In the 19th century, you can find that orphans all over the planet were moved throughout each country, every country, even Australia. There's no explanation for why suddenly there was a huge amount of orphans. There's no explaining where the orders came from. And the orders, you can find them today written down. If it's a white boy or girl, send them to North America. If it's a black boy or girl, send them to the south of North America, to the plantations. Somebody reorganized in the 19th century segregation of blacks and whites in America. It wasn't by accident. It was on purpose, because right after 1860, we see the so-called Civil War, a very contrived event where a central authority uses an excuse that they themselves created to take more control over America, the federal government. Again, this looks like a design. None of these events seem to be spontaneous at all. They seem to be very much evidence of someone trying to influence our affairs from Mars.
What do you think? What do you think about the World's Fairs and their connection to this? Do you think that they were kind of displaying some of this, older technology to the elites at the time?
Yeah, World's Fair had a lot of advanced stuff, and we didn't see it anymore after that. It wasn't an invention fair because all of that stuff had already been invented. For example, Nicholas Tesla had never invented any of the things that he has credit for. He just built newer versions of them. In fact, he had connections to mass production. So it's the mass production factories in Italy, the early ones of the first industrial revolution, that can really be credited for Tesla's inventions. But before that, you had hundreds of years of free technology. So the World's Fair represents a coalescing of all the technology that people have. They bring it from their houses and stuff, say, "Hey, look what we got." And the deep state marking all that stuff down and saying, "Hey, we're going to ban all of this stuff very soon. Thanks for doing that." The World's Fair was a really bad situation, an example of us being just led to the slaughter, if you ask me. Here is our technology, please ban it.
Right.
We didn't know better. We had no choice back then.
Now talk about what reset cities are, and you talked about there was a reset in 1912 and 1812, right?
Right.
And what are the reset cities?
A lot of conspiracy theorists get locked into theories related to cyclical prophecies. And I've always found this idea of prophecy very interesting, not because anyone can ever predict the future or travel to it, but because prophecy represents yet another revelation of method strategy, that you're putting it in plain sight, you see the tractors and so forth. The prophecy of the world ending, for example, seems to be really powerful. It separates people right out. In 1812, it does appear that the world did end. This mud flood event was so devastating that 75% of life on Earth was wiped out, and the remainder only survived because of these cargo cults, as I said, someone keeping them alive on purpose. So this event, this end of the world, which would never repeat again because the strategy would fail, it was a blueprint for taking over Earth. Starting 1812, you repair everything in 40 years, the cities and everything, give people the technology you want them to have. And then leading up to 1912, you're going to have to get rid of all of the people who feel independent, free, they're onto you, they're threats to you in any way. You got to reset them all. 1912, we do know that is right in the middle of World War One. World War One, if you look at the details of it, has been a conflict that was raising for about 40 years before it finally ended. So it wasn't just 4 years, but World War One represents a reset. All the countries in this planet were affected, even ones that had no reason to be involved. Afterwards, there was a great deal of loss of faith in institution. People stopped believing in churches and stuff. I mean, it was a reset in all of the ways you can imagine, and it was a blueprint because they're setting us up for something else, like a NASA religion, sort of, in the 20th century. And at some point, they knew at the end of the 20th century and the 21st that they would have to do a reset again. That there'd be a lot of people like you and me right here just talking about this stuff and saying, hey, that's not true. And that it would become time for another reorganization of life based on the blueprint. They use all the same reasons. Protesting, a virus, there's always a virus. War, there's always war. So you see that World War III, we came very close to it in 2014. It's supposed to be America and Russia over Crimea, because they took Crimea. And we were supposed to take it back, and we didn't. We just did nothing. So we knew we're not going to do World War III because that's that blueprint again. If we allow that to just run away, then we're going to find ourselves at the beginning of that blueprint again in 10 years. Here's another example of this revelation method in plain sight. The Matrix movies. You fan of the Matrix?
Of course, yeah.
Everyone is, right? I haven't seen the fourth one yet. I don't know if
No, I haven't seen that one yet.
it looks like something else entirely, but the first three are mind-blowing to me because the second movie, the plot of Matrix Reloaded, represents reset theory. They reveal to Neo that he's in the fifth iteration, that life in the Matrix has been reset purposefully 5 times already, and that they're headed for another reset. And it's their fault too, because they're protesting too much. So what does this movie possibly tell us about real life? It tells us that the bad guys, be they good or bad, have this burden, and they know that they're going to lose everything. And it's either going to, when everything falls apart, they're going to be the ones to put it all back together, or no one will be. And in The Matrix, we were surprised to find out that this had already happened many times, that the deep state or the machines were about to give up. They couldn't reset anymore. They're just going to let the whole thing go. So in real life, I believe we're exactly in the same position. We were supposed to hit another reset in 2012, but there's a lot of people who are onto this plan. They have been onto these plans for a long time. The plans of communism, for example, or just the plans of corporate taking over of every aspect of our life. People that have complained about the digital age or cell phone radiation. They've been there this whole time, and they've been fighting back. I do see signs, many signs, of a devastating plan that was supposed to take us all out, and signs that plan has been averted completely. That we're still seeing the falling out of that plan right now. That this crazy world that we see today represents an attempt to reset human society once again.
Man, yeah, we're gonna have to talk a little bit more about that. But first, I want to talk about the kind of onset of Abrahamic religions and belief in creator gods. And you said that this was kind of seeded by this off-planet breakaway civilization, right?
Right.
Now, this was done to basically keep us confused and in control, right?
Yeah, well, a monotheistic religion is a religion of control, complete and utter control over somebody's mind and body. And anything else, a polytheistic religion, represents free will. That there is not a single creator god influencing us, that gods are only supposed to be respected, not necessarily worshipped. It's totally different. So you look at the Jesuit expansion, and you see that its motives of monotheism, they're trying to redact every indigenous culture out there, convert them all, everyone, even Native Americans, into monotheism. And that what that really means is that they're trying to convince them that there's a creator god that's influencing their affairs still, and if they don't listen to them, they're going to be punished in some way. So to reference this directly, you look up the Spanish Edict of 1513. This is a paper that was written and mass-produced. 1513 is the official date. I think it was more like in the 19th century, but it really makes it clear. I'm going to just look it up actually because I like to talk about this thing all the time. Spanish Edict 81513. Yeah, Spanish Requiremento is what it's also called. And here's the last paragraph of it. They tell them, we want to set up churches in your country and you have to give up your tribal leaders. But here I'm quoting it. But if you do not do this and maliciously make delay in it, I certify that you, with the help of God, we shall powerfully enter into your country and shall make war against you in all ways and manners that we can, and shall subject you to the yoke and obedience of the church and their highness. And take your wives and your kids. I'm not gonna read the whole thing, but look this up. It's a crazy letter written by the Spanish conquistadors to when they took over the Aztecs and the Americans. But really, they're not talking like they respect their own religion. These guys are talking like they're going to use their religion to subjugate you. Indigenous. I mean, this is really open and obvious language, if you ask me. And again, evidence of an external influence here, not just a bunch of crusaders who are high on their religion, but somebody that's very purposeful. Like they said, the yoke and obedience of the church. Like we all know how bad that is. You don't want that, So they're saying, come willingly. Native Americans, we all know, did not. They didn't even understand these instructions. They didn't understand what it meant to give up their tribal leaders. That didn't make sense to them. They no comprendo. So it didn't work out, and that's why the Native Americans were utterly wiped out. That's what the Mormons say. It's a good reference point. The Book of Mormon literally says Native Americans disobeyed God, and God showed up and killed them all. And the ones that didn't get killed were scarred by the heat, and their skin turned red. This Book of Mormon, sounds like a fantasy to most people, and a lot of people make fun of it. But it could also be an actual literal reference point for this event. It wasn't God that showed up. It was the mud flood event. I hadn't really gotten into why I believe that was related to Mars, but let me just point that out real fast.
Yeah.
Like I said, a couple hundred years technology ahead of us by necessity, not because they're smarter, but because they're desperate. And in that desperation, they may have convinced their own people, hey, we're about to lose control of Earth. No more resources. Napoleon screwed everything up. We have one option. We can subjugate Earth. To do that, we have to destroy all of our enemies. And that means all of Napoleon's allies and his army, and then anyone else that will also become his allies or turn against us later. One big event all at once. So how they do this? Well, in predictive programming, we have a lot of reference points for a planet shooting another planet with a laser. It's in Star Wars. It's in Flash Gordon in the old days.
Yeah.
And that was a laser from Mars too, that one. And in Simpsons, in a Halloween episode, they literally show everyone's enslaved building a laser to shoot at another planet. So they're telling us this stuff in plain sight. This is potentially what happened. The people on Mars were enslaved. They built a laser and they shot it at all the enemies here on Earth. This precision weapon that could carve out entire continents and sort of reset things however they want. So I do believe that this kind of a space laser from Mars was employed to create the mud flood event. And the reason I believe this is because if the mud flood event is to be believed as a singular world event, then you have to explain where all of that energy came from to move all that mud. And you can't just say that the mud fell from the sky. It has to have been pushed into the sky by a certain amount of energy. And so I call my theory the mud flood energy event, because you got to find the energy. What was the energy? It doesn't matter to me. It's a laser or something else. It could be something entirely I can't imagine, but it requires energy. And that to me is a space laser, energy from one planet to the other. When does this happen? Every 26 months, Earth and Mars go into opposition. In opposition, it's pretty decently close to Earth, and the electromagnetic fields of the planets actually brush up against each other, which makes it actually possible to transmit energy and travel too. So they don't teach us much about opposition in school, but they also don't teach us about how far away things are really in the universe. So
Now, earlier you were talking about the gods versus a creator god and how, they're not meant to be worshipped but respected.
right.
Do you think that first of all, that these gods are some sort of interdimensional entities? And do you think that the breakaway civilization from Mars has aligned with maybe some of these negative interdimensional beings and maybe getting information or ideas or things of that nature?
Straight up, no. I don't really subscribe to anything that I would call magic or something that can't be proven in a lab. But as far as the gods, in Saturnian cosmology, they have a very straightforward explanation. It's one that
Mhm.
sold me as soon as I heard it, and that's that the gods are planets in our solar system, and for a time there, they were acting quite erratically. They were not acting like planets we know today. They were electromagnetically repelling each other, constantly rebalancing each other, and shifting in position. They would go up into heaven, which is near the sun. They'd come down into our plane, or even below it, underneath the earth, into the underworld. The underworld was not inside the earth back then; it was below Earth. And below Earth, you'd find Mercury, Neptune, and Uranus. I do not believe that Pluto is a real planet, so I don't think it was part of our configuration back then. But the point is that the planets constantly did stuff. They would move out of position. They would cause cataclysm on Earth, lightning bolts, fire, hail, you name it. Um, One planet in particular, Mars, was particularly active. It was the most active of all the god planets. It moved all over the place. It attacked Earth, it attacked Venus, had giant battles with Venus wrapped around it. It broke up its shell and recombined its shell. This is a story of Sir Lancelot, the strongest of the knights. This is a story of Prometheus, the god that gave us fire and technology. And in one of the last cataclysms that occurred on Earth, Earth and Mars, linked by their fields, finally detached for the last time and spread into the orbits that we know today. In that last event, Mars attacks Earth 10 times. And in each event, um, the humans on Mars had to learn how to survive it, had to survive massive lightning storms and everything in between. That's when humans first learned technology, not because somebody gave it to them, not because a demon showed up or an alien, but simply because they saw lightning storms, they saw that they hit the highest point on the ground, they saw that caves work enclosed, but they also saw that if you just build a certain shape, like a spire, that all of the damage will happen at the top of the spire, and everyone inside the spire will be protected, inside the cathedral, inside the temple, and all of these technologies were learned just by seeing the planet Mars, hit Earth. For that reason, people thought Prometheus was being punished because it stole Zeus or Jupiter's power or technology. The reason they thought that was being punished is because every time Mars came apart, they would see the inside of Mars, the layer that we see today, which we call the outside layer, and it's the same color as a liver. Um, they thought they saw inside Prometheus' body every time it came apart, and they saw that the inside was lightning scarred. Just like today, you look at Mars today, you see massive scars all over it, they're way bigger than the Grand Canyon. And Electric Universe researchers have pointed out very clearly that these are electric stars from a primordial time, and that humans, witnessed these events. They saw Prometheus being scarred. They saw his liver being scarred, and that's where those myths actually come from.
Wow, that's very interesting. Now I want to kind of shift gears a little bit
Uh,
towards the end here. Could you talk about what you wrote to me about how they tried to tell us Columbus discovered America and thought it was India, and why the Indian term kind of stuck? Could you talk a little bit about that?
yeah. One of the big surprises to me was when Anatoly Fomenko claimed, when I was reading his literature, he was claiming that the Columbus story occurred um, 300 years later than they say it did, um, and for the completely different reasons than we thought. Sorry, burp. That Fomenko says, according to the Russian literature that he studied in detail, that Columbus was part of an escape from the Inquisition. That everyone that hired him, the heretics of the West who were afraid of the Inquisition, hired him to come to America, and that by no means did he discover any of it. America was already well inhabited by the Rus Horde Empire, which expanded throughout the continent. It was everywhere on Earth, and they built Tartarian buildings everywhere. You see them in Oregon and California. You see them in Washington, the White House. So these buildings were there before Columbus, and they don't tell us that the Native Americans had anything to do with it. They showed Native Americans more or less as they look today in the reservations, in poverty, with no technology or knowledge or even writing or anything. This is not how Native Americans used to live. Let's see. Trying to remember a
Now,
topic here.
you
What
mentioned
questions?
Tartaria. I was asking about the Columbus
Oh yeah,
and
Columbus. Sorry,
the
sorry.
Indians. Yes.
Yeah, sorry. Okay, thank you. So when Columbus got here, they already knew the name of this country, India. It was already part of a discovered world of the Rus Horde Empire. But after the mud flood event, there was a reset, a reorganization of life on Earth as we know it. And there's a lot of evidence of this reorganization out in, I mean, it's not stuff I have to tell you about. Trail of Tears, right? Where the Native Americans of America were relocated. Now, they say it's only happened between a bunch of the plain states. But if you look at the train tracks, they continue all the way up into Alaska. And these Native Americans could have easily have been relocated all the way to the continent we know today as India. The based on their appearance, based on their skin color. Why do I believe that? Because, like I said, there's the Trail of Tears, based on the Indian Removal Act, was explicit. It was a racist act. It was defining people by their race. It says if you are looking like this, then you go over there. So I have no doubt that these policies existed back then. I just have a doubt that they were as small scale as they teach in history class. I think they're large scale. The Indians were moved all the way to India, given a new religion, monotheism, Buddhism, and they're still clinging to their Hinduism still in the region. And the Jesuit maps, which I told you earlier, are based on a false worldview of conquered Christianized nations, everything else unknown, decided from that point on that this place is going to be called America, or actually Columbia, if you want to be frank. This place is going to be called Columbia since Columbus showed up. And now we all know that the Columbus story makes no sense. Columbus never got to America. He only got to the Caribbeans. So why would they ever name a country over him? Why do they still call the District of Columbia? Why they name that location after him today? And why does the District of Columbia rule the rest of this continent? And why is it not part of our jurisdiction? They're not a state. What's going on? There's a whole mystery to the name Columbus that still hasn't been solved yet. And so the point is that the mystery, just a little bit bigger, could, if you look at it on a world scale, the mystery could have be where the Native Americans originally came from. If they were from America, then Columbus would have come here and say, this is India. And he would call it India because that's what everyone knew it as. And it wasn't until after the mud flood would anyone suggest that Columbus discovered something called America, which is a brand new name in the 19th century. All they had to do is relocate India to where it is today. And then there's one more problem. China. If Columbus thought he was supposed to reach India because he was crossing the world and didn't know America was there, and that the world wasn't flat and it wasn't going to fall off, then he would not have thought he reached India. He thought he would have reached China because China is closer and India doesn't have an easy port access. So that Columbus never reached China or met any Chinese, that the Chinese never got involved in any world history until the 19th century, that they're considered disconnected, even though there was no land or sea barriers between them or anyone else, represents, again, the mystery of Columbus. That whole story is a contradiction. He did not think he was going to India in Europe or Asia. He thought he was going to India in North America because that's what it was called.
Man, that's interesting.
Yeah.
You mentioned Tartaria a few minutes ago.
Yeah.
Now, I've heard different ideas of what exactly Tartaria was. For you, what is this? Was this part of this breakaway civilization on Earth?
Tartaria, or known as the Rus Horde Empire, was the biggest empire on Earth after the Egyptian/Babylonian slave empire. That was a big world empire too. That was a slave empire and very different in nature. It was monotheistic, like I said, and existed in primordial times. But in civilization times, in the last 1,000 years, we saw a different kind of empire, a completely different one in nature. And this is the Rus Horde Siberian Empire. It's also known as Tartaria because the Europeans always called the Horde people as Tartarians or barbarians, some sort of insulting group term, meaning they're not Christianized yet. So Tartaria is not what they called themselves up in the Rus Horde Empire. In fact, they didn't have a name for themselves because they were so eclectic. In fact, that's where the term Rus comes from. Or sorry, Horde comes from. Rus comes from Russia because that's what they are, Rus people. And Horde means that you see all kinds of different people. They don't look the same at all. You got giants, you got midgets, you got hairy people. They look like animals with dog heads, bear heads, you name it. It's all in their literature. The Jesus story, for example, in their version of it, the secular version, Jesus is a giant and he's hairy, and so is Mary. There's a book called Hairy Mary, which it talks about this whole theory of Mary, Jesus' mom, being a giant and hairy. And suddenly, when you look at these clues, it's like, oh wait, that makes sense. That's why they were thrown out of the hotel, because she couldn't fit in the hotel, right? It's not because they're so mean that they would kick a pregnant woman out of a hotel. It doesn't make sense. It's because she couldn't fit. She could fit in a stable because a stable is giant size. So, like I said, once you start to incorporate Tartarian Rus Horde history into the last 1,000 years, you see how it just fits everything, and how the Europeans totally stole all of it, ripped it apart, duplicated events multiple times, to the point that you wouldn't believe who's the same person. Fomenko says that, what's his name? Columbus is actually the same person as Noah from the Bible. And it's like mind blowing, right? How could that be? That's crazy. Noah, that's from ancient times, and Columbus, modern times. That reading his text really kind of blew my mind, because it made me really start to think. If you're lying about world history, what strategy would you choose? You're not just going to choose something that comes apart. They redacted old stories into new stories because those are the hardest ones to prove are lies. One that I've realized myself only about a week ago, and this is just going to sound crazy, is in the Exodus story, the story of Moses. We all know the Exodus story is an African story. It's something the Africans actually experienced, not the Europeans, who then later wrote the Bible and claimed the story. They never experienced it. So why are they acting like they're the chosen people from the Exodus story? The answer to that question is the older version of the Exodus story in Africa didn't have a chosen people at all. The Africans did not consider themselves, oh, you're chosen, I'm not, or anything like that. They all believed that the Exodus off that old ancient slave empire was caused by the angel of death passing over the world. This angel of death, Venus, planet Venus, was so inspiring because it proved that the priests were wrong. They couldn't predict the event. They couldn't explain why the gods suddenly came apart. It's clearly not monotheism anymore. All of these reasons, and the Africans ditched the slave empire and left the pyramids. That's the Exodus story. And then the Europeans added one element. They said, oh, but there's a chosen people, the Jews, who are also there. And they left, and they went to Palestine through Egypt, through the desert, through the Egyptian desert. And it took them 40 years, right? I had learned this stuff in Hebrew school when I was a kid. Like, I had a rabbi like go through the Torah with us and show us all the details of the Exodus story. And there's a lot of details about how they survived in the desert for 40 years. They were supplied by manna from heaven. Something was dropping them supplies and everything to build houses with, even, or tents, I mean. And that at some point that this entity promised them that they would be delivered into the promised land. That's the Exodus story that was added on to the African version. And in the mud flood, we see the exact same thing. We see 40 years of desolation across the planet, covered in mud, which is a desert. So the earth is now a desert. It lasts 40 years before the plant life starts to come back. And during that time, the humans are all about to be wiped out. And something from the sky is dropping them cargo, and eventually trains and stuff, and promising them that it will deliver them to the promised land, wherever that, like Colorado mountains and stuff like that. And this story, this Exodus deliverance story in the Bible, in the Torah, to me, appears to be the exact same story as the mud flood. This deliverance occurred about 200 years ago. These people were actually delivered all over the world, and they represent extremely religious secret societies today who are sort of holding on to that memory that God has, given them everything, all this wealth and stuff. And I think that represents the biggest social problem we have today. You want to take power away from the leaders that are ruining things? You got to convince them that God really isn't controlling affairs here because that is everything they know from top to bottom. They will never believe you. And they certainly won't believe that it was Martians tricking them this whole time.
Yeah, man. Wow, that is fascinating. I'm definitely gonna have to have you back on. We are barely scratching the surface of some of this stuff.
Yeah, yeah,
Uh, but I do want to close out on this. I want to close out on how you feel our future is going to go. You said that basically there was another attempted reset that failed around 2012, and we're just kind of witnessing the remnants of what happened. Do you think that we're headed towards a better timeline in the future?
absolutely. Without a doubt. Like I said, I don't think that the strategy, the one employed here, could ever be repeated. It's guaranteed to have the same results or worse. The deep state knows this. They were afraid of this happening. They've done everything they can. But at this point in our history, I think humanity has become way too self aware. The predictive programming that has been employed to keep us silent and sheepish has caused almost like a backlash. The conspiracy community, I've never seen it so big. I mean, back when I got started, it was not there. It was almost not there. And now, like almost everyone you see is talking about some sort of conspiracy, even if it's just, the Biden administration or something. They're completely at crossroads in their reality. And to me, that says if they can't actually pull off their reset, then they have completely failed to control the one thing, the narrative, that was the only thing they ever had that ever worked. Now we can believe our own reality. Now we can say, I don't need to, take vaccines, or I don't need to do education. My kids don't need to learn anything that's fake. We don't need to pay taxes, federal taxes. I mean, the revolutions are going to come and they're never going to stop. It's going to be like this ridiculous avalanche of everything you can possibly imagine being solved within a matter of years and decades. Sounds outlandish, sounds impossible, but from what I can see, it's like we've been held back like this huge slingshot for so long. And all of the things we should have done a long time ago, like flying cars or health technology or communication, is simply being held back. And if it was to ever release, then we're going to be in a completely new reality. So I look forward to it. I'm completely optimistic.
Yeah, man, I hope you're right. I'm very optimistic too. And, I tend to sway my hopes and thoughts towards that direction too. And thank you so much for coming on, man. This was fantastic. We'll have to do this again because I think we barely scratched the surface of some of
Yeah,
this
yeah.
stuff. I know there's a lot more we could talk about.
Yes.
Before you head out, let everyone know where they can find more about you, your website, social media, all that good stuff.
Absolutely. Just go to paradigmthreat.net. That's my website and project. I haven't updated it in a few years, but all my research is there and I plan to update it soon. And there's a Discord link. Please check that out because we have a big community now. A lot of people talking, researching things, sharing things. If you have anything to share, please show it to us and we'll put it on the website. I believe that investigation is the funnest part of this. It's like solving puzzles. Yeah.
Yeah. All right, man, for sure. Well, like I said, we're gonna have you back on some time in the future. And until next time, everyone, have an excellent evening. We'll be talking again tomorrow.
Thank you. I appreciate it.
All right, man, that was awesome.
Yeah, it was
Thanks so
fun.
much. Yeah, it was. I'll have this up in like a couple hours, and I'll send you out all the links.
Awesome. Looking forward to it.
Awesome, man. Well, have a good day.
You too, man. See you later.
See you.